In 1967, Sunbeam unveiled this, the second generation Rapier. It replaced the series models that were based on the Hillman Minx with this version, which is based on the 1966 Hillman Hunter four-door saloon. Well, technically, this isn't based on the saloon. No, this dramatic fastback was actually based on the estate floor pan. And actually, it was the same designer, Roy Axe, who designed both this sleek fastback coupe and the estate. They even use exactly the same rear lights. His inspiration appears to have been the Plymouth Barracuda of the mid-1960s, although he always denied this and said it was just coincidence. But it's worth pointing out, by the time this car was developed, Chrysler had quite a stake in the Roots Group. It would become effectively its European operations. Even the key has a little Chrysler star on it by the time this one was made. So the truth of the matter is probably there or thereabouts. When you look at early styling proposals, some of which you can see at the excellent AR Online website, it's fully glazed on the back here, which is even more like the Barracuda. I suspect some cost cutting meant they went for this simpler multi-pane approach. But we've got pillarless glass. The windows don't quite sink away, but it's pretty good. And we've got frameless doors, of course, as well. It's very, very stylish. My dad had a Hillman Hunter when I was a child, which I loved. No one else at school had a car with overdrive, although that was actually old technology. And I used to see these around and I just dreamt that one day we might own one. This was the glamorous cousin. This is effectively the Ford Capri against the Cortina, although unlike the Capri, it doesn't hide its saloon pretensions, or beginnings rather, all that well. The front end is just exactly the same as the Humber Scepter, which was the plusher version of the Hunter, which also had these round headlamps. The Hunter tended to have, apart from sporty versions, rectangular lamps. Not a particularly interesting car in terms of the mechanical makeup. There's an awful lot carried over from the earlier Audax cars. So as we saw in the Sunbeam Rapier, 1725cc four-cylinder engine with origins going back to a 1494cc engine, although it's now a 5-bearing crankshaft. Let's have a peek at it. So here is the 1725cc engine. Twin Stromberg carburettors were part of the Rapier specification. There was also the Holbay tuned H120 with just over 100 brake horsepower, but it's still a very simple engine. Overhead valve. Got McPherson strut front suspension. That is a change from the earlier models, again inspired very much by Ford. But yeah, nice, easy to work on. It's a very uncluttered engine bay. Got the oil filter just down here, distributor here, spark plugs. Nothing is in the way of anything else. It looks a bit of a joy to work on, to be honest. Getting inside is nice and simple, especially with the windows down. And a nice detail is you put your hand through the door handle to operate the door release, but you'll note it's got a right hand handbrake, just like the earlier Audax cars. Good old vinyl interior to burn yourself on. And if I jump aboard, we'll just straighten the wheel for a better view of the dials. And yeah, quite a lot of dials there are as well. We've got a clock, which sadly doesn't work. We've got oil pressure, amps, fuel, coolant temperature, nice big rev counter, and a speedometer. We've also got the same switchable lights here, but you can dim down at night, that we saw in the Singer Vogue and the Sunbeam Alpine. Seems to be an awful lot of Roots going on the channel recently. That can only be a good thing. Choke control here. Let's pull that out for choke. We've got a USB. How fancy. And also fancy, we've got electric power steering. It's on the column because the chap's father who owns this car is in his 80s now, and it does make quite the difference. Overdrive is controlled by the stalk here, as it was in the Sunbeam Alpine, and similarly we've got this gorgeous, beautiful gearbox that is lovely to use. Hydraulic clutch means it's nice and light in terms of pedal. There's also a modern stereo, one of these retro ones that tries to look a bit old-fashioned. Heater controls here, 2-speed blower fan, and I think that's your dashboard. Your panel lights, you can turn them off if you wish. Got a little ashtray down here, complete with an old 20p piece. This is your cigarette lighter for, you know, cigarettes on the move, in which case these little quarter lights, you can flick your cigarette ash out of the window. So these open like so. and that's quite jolly. A bit old-fashioned by the mid-1970s when this car was produced, perhaps. It's an organ style throttle pedal as well. That's also a little old-fashioned, but nice, simple, clean, contemporary design in here, I think. With a little glove box as well, with a vanity mirror for checking your makeup. They didn't put it in the sun visor. I suppose that means you don't have to change it for left-hand drive. Very strange shape on the interior mirror, but look at the over-shoulder vision. It's absolutely brilliant because there's just no pillars, so it's quite nice, I would say. And the driving position's nice as well. It's really well thought out, I think. I find it really comfortable. Not quite so good in the rear. Tilt the entire seat. Oh, some plant life has managed to get in here. Got this chaos of seat belts. They're all static seat belts. Someone's fitted rear belts, and that's the attachment point for the fronts. No inertia reel, there's nowhere to fit it, so that's all a bit chaotic. But if we pull the seat back, you can see it's a little tight for one of my stature. I'm under 6 foot, but it's still a little tight. But headroom also tight because the roofline is swooping down. But the family that owned this car, all of them packed in it to go to the south of France to rekindle a trip from their youth, and that's what this car is all about. It's a massive nostalgia trip, but it must have been a little cozy back here. Incidentally, that trip is why the car looks as it does, complete with the side stripes. It is a replica of that original car they all went on holiday in back in the 1970s. On an L plate, this is about a 1973, I think. With production ending of these models in 1976. The Hunter struggled on a little more until 1979, although I think the last one was actually built in New Zealand in 1980. But yeah, a very simple car, but quickly became rather dated. But what does it actually drive like? Sadly, for reasons of noise and also the fact that it's quite cool today, I've had to wind the windows up. So that's changed the sound dynamic in here quite a lot. Let's fire up the engine. There we go. It sounds quite raughty. It sounds even raughtier on the outside, actually. Reminds me very much of that Sunbeam Alpine. It's a very similar noise. Wipers. We've got a switch here for the lights, and then this is the wiper control. You push it in for a bit of squirty, and then you twist it for a bit of wipey. And eventually they do kick in. They're a little slow, but you don't have to put a lot of pressure on that, and you get quite a good output. Is just a little triangle of doom just there, and you'll note obviously it's left-hand drive pattern on a right-hand drive car. They swapped it over for export. Annoyingly, I'm not entirely sure why they did that, but the Triumph Dolomite, Citroen GS indeed, were the same, and it's just what they thought was good at the time. I think that quickly became a little dated. There we go. Put the wipers on. I'm pleased to say the wipers at least don't squeak. On my dad's Hillman Hunter, they squeaked incessantly all the time. Very interesting. That car was like 10 years old when we had it, and it felt absolutely done in. Right, handbrake is down here. The steering, of course, is nice and light. It's a steering box rather than rack and pinion, so it's a little old-fashioned. Seems to have a little play in it, a little uncertainty, but the electric power steering works very nicely. No intermittent wipe, of course, because such things weren't very common in the 1970s. Well, the weather's taken a bit of a turn for the worse, but we shall make the most of it. Oh, raughty. Overdrive on 3rd and 4th. So I can change the ratios with just a flick of that little lever. So we're in 3rd. Overdrive at the moment. There's a bit of a knock from somewhere. I'm not entirely sure where. It's not suspension. I think it is possibly the windows. But it must be a fairly flexible body shell with no pillars in the middle of it. But yeah, it's just a lovely car to drive. The electric power steering, you know, it definitely takes some feel away. But The benefit is it just makes the controls so much lighter. I mean, this is not a sporty car. I think that's the difference with the Capri. The Capri feels a bit more chuckable. This just feels a little ordinary, and a bit ordinary saloon car. It doesn't feel like a sporting car. And I don't think the H120s actually felt all that more sporting, even with their extra power. Quite close ratios, making good use of the overdrive, because when you need to cruise, you just drop the overdrive in, you've got that cruising ratio. So effectively, what we've got here is a 6-speed gearbox. Brakes seem to respond fairly well, they're quite encouraging. But overall, it's just what a pleasant car to drive. It pulls so well from low revs. That's pulling from 1,000 revs in third gear. It just feels really, really nice. I'm not sure it felt really nice for my poor dad when we had a Hillman Hunter, because by the mid-1980s, they were just cheap old bangers. And I loved the fact it had an overdrive in a Topaz special edition. But really, that was very old-fashioned at a time when 5-speed gearboxes were the norm. A system that went away with transverse engines, which made it more difficult to apply the overdrive principle. It's effectively a bolt onto the back of the gearbox, but gives you different final drive ratios. Yeah, it's competent enough, but yeah, that steering really does rob any sense of feel whatsoever. But what drove Roots into the arms of Chrysler was money. They'd lost so much with developing the Linwood plant and the Hillman Imp, but they needed this car to be a massive success. And while it sold in reasonable numbers, I think over 400,000 units, it wasn't really enough. So let's open her up a bit. There you go, 60 miles an hour, we're doing just under 3,000 revs. Actually feels quite relaxing. There is a fair bit of wind noise, which I don't think you'd get in a Hunter. It's the downside to this frameless, pillarless design, is those seals are having to work very hard, and I don't think they can keep all the wind noise out. Plus we've got the little quarter lights as well, of course. All these are sources of noise. That switch is actually quite irritating to get at. Ergonomics came on so much during the 1970s, where column stalks tended to find favour. Yeah, it just feels really nice, and I don't think you could get overdrive in a Ford Capri. I might be wrong, but Ford seemed to ditch overdrive fairly early on and just stick with 4-speed gearboxes. So I don't think the Cortina could be spec'd with overdrive either. So motorists in the 1970s got used to a fairly revvy driving experience. There's no driveline shunt or anything. It's actually really nice to drive. I know this car's had a fair old restoration on it. I really like it. Need to open the window to get that exhaust note. Yeah, I like that. That's good. So there we go. That was the really rather lovely Sunbeam Rapier. A beautiful example. It's been a joy to drive. Thank you very much for watching. Don't forget you can head to the Hubnut store to buy lovely merchandise should you wish. Don't forget to check out the back catalogue. Over 1,000 videos for you to enjoy. And I look forward to seeing you in a future video. Farewell.